Welcome to Through the Lens of Christ, a podcast designed to have conversation about things that are happening in culture, questions that we may have theologically, and other questions that impact our day in and day out lives. Our desire is to be able to build these conversations and to be able to get us to critically think not just about the events that are happening, but how do we see these events through the lens of Christ. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope it helps you to critically think through issues in our lives. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Adam.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. So we're going to we're wrapping up. Although chapter 12 kind of wraps up the Hall of Faith, but we're going to wrap up chapter 11 with our. We had the message on Sunday, and so with our conversation this morning. So as we've been doing, we'll start by reading it and then dig in.
Sounds good. Me without my glasses. Let's see how well I can do this. And my phone. So my arm is stretched out as far as it can go, and I think I can see it. So here we go. So starting in verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. It's quite a section of Scripture.
I was going to say, again, there's so much in there. And again, the author's given so many specific examples, and then he just kind of, throws out all of these other, and by the way, right?
Right.
There's some good things in there. So what stuck out to you?
What always strikes me in this little section, and actually I think it was pointed, it's nothing I found myself, but it's clear as a bell. There's this huge shift that takes place, right? Where is the verse where the switch happens? Quench the power, escape the edge, and then verse 35. So it gives all these heroic acts, all these, as you talked in the message, these miracles. These are all miracles that happened. And in verse 35, it switches. Women receive back their dead by resurrection, torturing, all the different things that happened are all part of this story right here, which I think is amazing. And then at the end, of course, the last couple of verses, they didn't receive what was promised. God had something better for them.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a stunning section of Scripture for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he does and again, I say he does an impressive job. Well, it's the Holy Spirit inspired, so of course he did an impressive job.
It's always
right?
impressive.
So, but just an impressive job of framing up all, like, yes, there's persecution for faith, and yes, there's going to be difficulty because we live in a broken world, and yes, there's going to be difficulty because we're broken people, and like, there's all these different things. But he's like, but God's the God of all of it,
right?
And so, do we trust in Him, or do we, I mean, I look at all those situations, even the miraculous things, and how many times do we not believe that God is the God of the miraculous things, right? That
right.
He's the God of the world, but that means the world I understand, and that means the world that I can explain, but not everything else. But yeah, whether it's the miraculous good, where He does these amazing things that we would consider to be good, right? Or this God of suffering and these difficult things that come our way, and often related to this Christian persecution. Like our faith is the one that is opposed to this world that hated Jesus, so of course it's going to hate us. And how does a broken world respond to Jesus?
Yeah, for sure. I had just as I was listening, I listened to the message that you had last night. I wasn't around on Sunday, but two things kind of struck me with regard to faith. So all of these things are in the context of faith. So I get that these things are miraculous events, but the miraculous thing about it is that God did them through faith. So I think what's happening is the bigger miracle here is faith. Could be. I'm going to see what you think about this theory, because I have another thing that kind of correlated with this in the last week. That the fact that they went through this in faith is the bigger miracle in my head right now, both on the good side and also on the negative side, on the persecution side. So I don't want to lose track, I think, of faith. This is the faith chapter, and they went through this in faith, by faith, through faith. Yep. The other thing that kind of correlated with that with me was a conversation about the church. I was reading a book on the church, and it was talking about the beauty that we see in the world, God's creation in people made in the image of God, the beauty in mountains and streams and all these different things, and even in human relationships and beautiful things there. And he mentioned, but there is something that's more beautiful than that, and that is the church. And we don't always look at the church as being beautiful. And the reason the church is beautiful is because God changes lives through faith, by grace through faith in the church. And so that was in the back of my head as I was listening to your message on Sunday. And then I thought, well, these miracles are really important, but the fact that faith is the carrier of grace to these people through the strength and through the weakness, I think might well be the bigger miracle in this whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think what he's trying to get across is this whole idea of being changed, right? It's the like the Ephesians 2, where he says this is a gift given to us, and trying to bring out this idea that you're right. I think the gift of faith is what he is saying, is that we can't muster this up. We can't just do it. All these people wouldn't have, like, I don't think, and I don't want to say definitively, but like the fiery furnace.
Sure.
If I didn't have faith, I'm walking into that going, okay, I'm dead, right? Like there's no,
right.
And they're walking into it going, I might be dead, I might be alive, right? Like
right.
Either way, God is with me.
Yep.
And I think that's the you're right. I mean, that's the miracle. You've got all these situations that are happening, which in our human brain, we're going to think definitively one way, right?
Yep.
But God changes that. And so it's not just how we see a true, parting of the Red Sea, right? It's how we see every situation, every circumstance, that he's changing us. He's been talking throughout all of Hebrews that we can just take on religion, right? We can take on ritual and rites, but that doesn't change us. There's one thing that changes us, and that's Christ. And Christ brings with that faith. And so what does that look like to be changed? I think you're absolutely right that I think that's his point, and that should be our hope as believers, which goes back to the beauty of the church, that we're all being changed by this faith. We're all being moved into a different place, and sometimes I need to be reminded of that. Right? It goes back to Hebrews chapter 10 that we need to come together and encourage one another. But it's not that my faith isn't strong enough, right? It's God's faith that he's given to us. Not that my faith isn't strong enough, is that I'm not strong enough and I forget. And sometimes I need people like you and Ashley and other people to go, hey, don't you remember this is who this God is? And I think that's part of the beauty of the church.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, God made us all in his image. That separates us from the chickens and the rabbits, but he also gives, what separates man from man is faith. Yes. And that conduit of grace that, like you said, changes us and allows us to be a part of. God can do anything. It's no big deal that he has it's no big deal. It's no big deal that he has a fiery furnace that either burns up or doesn't burn up something.
Right.
This is no trouble for God. The fact, though, that he uses human people made in his image through faith to do that, to change them and to change others, that is the pinnacle of the deal. In my estimation, I think. So that's a big thing. You mentioned, and which I don't think you mentioned much on Sunday, maybe I'm wrong, Christ, because I thought about that as well. You talked about faith, what faith is, and the one thing that I thought would be nice to clarify was faith has an object. And the object is Christ, to make sure that he's the focal point of all this. So you mentioned him here. I think it's really important because what do we have faith in, and how does that faith come to us, and how was it procured or put together and given to us.
Right.
Certainly, it's through the blood and shed blood, the life, the death, and resurrection of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good clarification, right? And I think Vince did a good job in the communion meditation of framing up this gospel message and how faith does change us. And he used the image of the Roman soldier, right, who watches all of these things happen and then can't help but give a confession of faith back to, who Christ was and who God is. And I think that's where it all begins, is that we've got to be changed. We're being changed through this grace, salvation, and faith in Christ. And good.
I'm trying to think about the change and thinking what's changing for you right now, and what's God doing for you, and I'm trying to think what's God doing for me right now and changing each of us. And I just threw that out there, but for me, I'm coming off a difficult kind of a family weekend. I think for me, He's given me a grace to step back and not and see people rather than sin. I was with some of my kids this weekend, and we were talking about some difficult relational situations, and the comment was, "You're giving this guy so many chances," and aren't you angry about the sin? And I'm kind of like, yeah, I am angry about the sin. I really hate some of the sin that's going on in this whole relational thing that's going on. I go, but I'm trying really hard to see the person first. I do think God's changing me in that way lately. I mean lately, like the last couple of years, in a way that I haven't been changed in the past. Just focusing on people rather than what they're doing and what I'd like for them to do and what they might want me to do, and just focusing on them. So I do think that's something that God's been doing for me and changing me. I don't know. Do you have anything? I know I just kind of brought it out here, but and I honestly had nothing in my head until I said that. So I just kind of gave away something on myself there that may be helpful. But I think He is doing a work in me in a different way in the last couple of years, and I'm anxious for Him to do more. Yeah. So
I guess two things, because I thought of one thing first, and then when you shared your side, I was like, yeah, actually, I think so. I'll start with that one. I'm naturally a judger, right? You go through personality profiles, and I'm an INTJ, which means that I view everything through judging eyes, right? What should people do and what shouldn't they do? And I think even as just a person of sin, I'm a prideful person, and I'm pretty sure I'm right all the time. And so you want people to act the way that you believe that they should act. And I was just talking to my wife yesterday, like, where do you put lines on things, right? I mean, we've got 2 younger kids and 2 older kids, and we see sin issues in all of them, right? Just different stages. And you're like, so where do you put lines of judgment on things, right? Where you're like, okay, this rises to the level of some point of discipline, but this doesn't. And, it's this idea of sin is sin, yet there's different consequences, at least earthly consequences for these things. And all sin separates us from God, so we shouldn't be comfortable with any of it. But yet some things we're like, yeah, that's fine. And some of those things that we say, that's fine, are just because it's in my life, so of course I'm more comfortable with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just think that image of seeing the person first and desiring to see some consistent mode of change, right? We're looking for, is there some fruit? Is there, and even sometimes the fruit is like, man, that little strawberry could have probably stayed on the vine a little longer, right? I mean, you're like, I wish we saw bigger clusters of berries or something, but yeah, I think trying to see people for people and trying to acknowledge who I am first, that I've been a believer a long time, and man, there's been significant change in my life, and there is to be significant change in my life in the future. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big one. That's a good one. I also think for me, it's just I'm such a planner. I don't like uncertainty. I'm really good with building a plan, executing the plan, getting this done. And so I've just
praying that it's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, God will correct this mess, but we gotta get moving. And, I look at things in my life, in-laws have a lot of health issues, and none of that we know how to navigate, right? So that's all this uncertainty. You've got in the news with the company I work for. There's all this uncertainty with the company I work for. We're trying to do a church plant. We're trying to there's all this uncertainty. Like my whole life is uncertain right now, and I think, and that's again, I can look at that and be like, God, where are you? But that's not like God's like, no, you struggle with uncertainty, and I'm going to help you understand that you don't need to be certain. You need to be certain that I'm certain, right? And
Right.
how do I start to reposition that? And so I think, yeah, I'm learning that daily right now.
That's interesting. I know I feel like we're a little off subject, and I got us here. I apologize, but I feel like the older I get, when I was 30 or 40 years old, I thought you have this picture of what your life's going to look like when you're in your 50s or 60s or whatever, right? And that picture is so off for me. I mean, right? You think, you'll have some things figured out, and some things will be secure, and I feel like nothing's secure, and everything's in a constant state of turmoil in like multiple areas, at least of my life. And you just mentioned your life as well, and I just don't think that's going to end. I think I'm just preparing myself. I think that's the Lord working in one sense, preparing us for a life of turmoil until we can actually be at a place where there is no more turmoil. I mean, the amazing thing about that is a switch is going to get flipped, right? It's going to be massive turmoil and then none of it,
right?
Which I think is going to be just a stunning entrance into the kingdom. But I feel that too. So many different things are out of our control. I don't know, trying to tie it back to the text. Look what was in the control of these people that we're talking about. Not much.
Right.
I mean, they're put in a situation that wasn't designed by them. All the things that happened, the events and the planning that God did ever since the foundation of the world to plan all the events in Hebrews chapter 11 that occurred so that they could, quench the fire, stop the mouths of lions, bring back their dead by resurrection, and get sawn in two.
Yep.
These are not incidental things. You talk about a planner. God's a master planner, and He's got everything taken care of. And these things, they just were there, just like we're part of the fabric of our lives. This was the way they were in the fabric of their world. I think that's similar.
Yeah, and this, one of the three really broad levels of the things he talks about at the end of chapter 10 is like the God of providence and the God of miracles and the God of suffering, right? And so I think everything in our lives fits into those things, but it's not this God of providence, right? Like He doesn't stop being providential, right? There isn't anything in my life that He's not expressing His providence over. I just don't see it, right? And if I don't have eyes of faith to see it, I just think of how many times I've missed the things of providence. And if you actually put things back into a perspective of, and we've talked about this before, but is man sovereign or is God sovereign, right? And so if I look at me as sovereign, then I lose the image of God's providence over everything, and this image of faith is faith in me and my abilities and what I can do and how do I make the world a better place, and all these things that might not even be horrible things, right? They're well organized and probably right focused, but it's wrong perspective. But if and I think, again, in everything we talked about, what God's teaching us, this idea of His providential hand in the things that we don't see, in the things that I don't immediately feel. You look through these examples, they didn't feel like God's providence was there. And even in the miracles, it's still God's providence. Even in the suffering, it's still God's providence. And I think that's just another thing that we don't see without faith.
I think that's right. I think we don't see God's providence, His sovereignty, and that how all-encompassing that is without faith. And I think that grows in us too. I mean, God grows that. How do we gain more faith? I think God gives you. We talked about that on Sunday some, and God grants that to us so that we can understand our world better and trust Him more in all of the different things that are happening to us, because there's a lot going on, and you could feel pretty defeated. And some people say, well, that's evidence that God's not real, right? Or that God doesn't care for you or love you. But the Bible tells a different story, and the fact that we're changed by those events in ways that make us more like Jesus also tells a different story. Yeah.
I think people struggle with if I'm going to see it as that this is proof that God isn't real, right? It's because God isn't building the story the way I want the story built. And it goes back to this original sin condition of pride, right? I'm unable to just eliminate my pride, which, again, we talk about God's sovereignty and salvation, grace, faith, all being a gift from God. If I don't receive that gift, there's no way I get past my pride. There's no way I can just open my eyes wider and see, now I see God, right? Like there's too much of me to be blinded by, but that I'm just not going to be able to see the truth of who God is. And yet it's Romans 1, right? He's been revealing himself to us the whole time, but I can't see beyond me. And then at some point he opens up our eyes and we're like, okay, this is what I need.
Yeah, it's so amazing because so you think about the Bible. I think about the Bible and I think the whole, writing it and the things that it says. I'm like, it is so otherworldly. It's so like the natural man, I think, reads the Bible and goes, this is crazy stuff, right? So that's crazy enough that it even exists by all these people that put it together. But the next crazy thing, which kind of goes back to that whole thing I was talking about, being faith being the miracle. So then it goes back to, well, there are people that actually read the Bible and they believe this stuff now. like us,
yep, right.
which is like, first of all, that it exists at all, and it was put together by all these crazy people, and it's so wild that it's there at all, that it exists, and then people actually believe it is another major craziness, miracle type of thing, and then to understand how well it fits in with this world. When at first glance from the natural man, it's totally otherworldly. It doesn't match at all, and you're like, wait a minute. It fits better than the real thing, what I thought was the real thing. Yeah. So this must be the real thing, and now I get to look through this lens and understand my world or the world in a whole different way, in a different perspective. I think those are just evidence. This is why that miracle of faith is the real miracle, the big miracle that's going on. And then when you've got a group of people together of faith that form a church together, that church is really a beautiful thing in this world, and that's a whole nother depth of another type of miracle that God puts together for us in our world.
Yeah. No, here it's well said. I mean, it's Narnia, right?
It is. Right? It's so crazy.
I mean, you're like none of this is real. None of this makes sense. You go tell somebody about it, but yet to you, it's absolutely real, right? Like I can see with open eyes. I can see the things that are unbelievable. I don't, but some of it's still confusing, and some of it we're still trying to figure out. But it's there and it's real, and you can't force someone to logically think their way to faith. No. And I think that's one thing. Even as Christians, we try to enforce our perspective of just see it, right? Just if you would just understand. That's not our job.
Yeah, that's that whole idea. I mean, there's lots of different ways to go about apologetics, but, just me convincing someone else of something because I'm me or because I've got the smarts and the power to do it, and they, decide to believe me, that's just a problem. Right. It's just that's a legalistic mess,
right?
Which would be that would be a good podcast sometime just to talk about that kind of stuff again. But we dabble at it here and there, but that is quite a topic, and a deep, difficult one.
It is. But again, we're in Narnia, right? Yeah. We're seeing things with different eyes. We desire that other people would come join us and
help us see
that happens, right?
Right. Come help us see things with different eyes, and let us, see through your eyes and see some things that we see together as a church.
Yes. Yep. So God is changing us. He's changing us individually, changing us corporately, and by faith in Christ, we continue to walk that path.
For sure.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Adam.